The voicemail came at 6:47 on a Wednesday morning. I know the exact time because I'd checked my phone before heading out to the east field, set it on the workbench, and left it there. When I came back an hour later, boots still muddy from the drainage ditch, the screen showed one missed call and a small envelope icon. My sister-in-law's voice on the recording was practiced in the way voices get when someone has rehearsed a difficult thing several times before pressing call. She said she had been meeting with her estate attorney. She said the farm property fell within my brother's estate. She said she would be listing it with a realtor by the 1st of next month, and that she needed me to arrange removal of my equipment and personal tools from the workshop no later than the 28th. She said she was sorry for the short notice, but that these decisions had to be made. My brother had been gone 19 days. I listened to the message a second time, standing at the workbench with a cup of coffee I'd poured before going outside. The coffee was cold. I finished it anyway. Then I set the phone down, picked up my pruning saw, and went back out to deal with the fence line. The work was there, and it needed doing, and I had learned a long time ago that you think clearer when your hands are occupied. My brother and I had bought that property together in the spring of 1991. I was 34. He was 31. We had pooled what we had, my savings from 12 years of carpentry work and his from a decade driving long haul, and we had paid cash for 62 acres outside of Cookeville, Tennessee. The farmhouse, the barn, the workshop I'd built myself over 2 summers. We signed the deed together at the county clerk's office, both names, joint tenancy with right of survivorship. I remembered the smell of that building. I remembered the way my brother had grinned when we walked back out into the afternoon sun, squinting a little, his hand on my shoulder for just a moment. He had used the eastern 30 acres for cattle. I had used the workshop for my carpentry business, which I'd run out of that building for 22 years before I retired. When his health started declining 2 years ago, I moved into the farmhouse to help him manage things. We spent those last 2 years the way brothers do when they know time is shortening, working in the mornings, talking in the evenings, not making a production of any of it. He passed on a Tuesday in early April, quietly in his own bedroom, with the window cracked the way he always kept it. After I finished the fence work that morning, I went inside and sat at the kitchen table with the deed from the fireproof box in the spare room. I read it slowly, both names, joint tenancy, right of survivorship. Under Tennessee law, that meant the property had transferred to me at the moment of my brother's death, without going through probate at all. His share had not passed to his estate. It had passed directly to me. That is what joint tenancy means. It is not a feeling or a preference. It is a legal structure, and we had chosen it deliberately 33 years ago with full knowledge of what we were doing. I took photographs of every page of the deed on my phone. Then I drove into town. I had a friend from my early carpentry days who had gone into real estate law, practiced out of a 2-room office on the south end of Main Street for nearly 30 years. We had not talked in some time, but when I walked in and his receptionist told him who was at the door, he came out himself and shook my hand. I told him what had happened. He listened the way good listeners do, without shifting in his chair or interrupting, his eyes on me the whole time. When I finished, he asked me one question. Had my brother and I ever changed or amended the deed since the original purchase in 1991? I told him we had not. He nodded and pulled his chair forward. He said, "She has no claim on this property. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship is one of the clearest ownership structures in Tennessee property law. When your brother died, his interest did not pass to his estate. It passed directly to you. Her attorney should know this." He paused. Either he doesn't, or he is working from whatever version she gave him. I asked what I should do. He said I should do nothing hasty and let him draft a letter. He asked for the deed photographs, which I sent to his email while he sat across from me and watched. He said he could have something ready by end of day. His rate was fair, and I told him it was fine. I drove home and ate lunch at the kitchen table, a sandwich I didn't taste much, and looked out at the workshop through the window. I had built that structure myself, the footings, the framing, the roof. I'd hauled the lumber in a borrowed pickup over 3 weekends in the summer of 1993. The east wall still had the pencil marks where I'd measured the window placement twice before cutting. More than 2 decades of work had moved through that building. Furniture, cabinets, porch railings, a set of church pews for a congregation outside of Algood that I still drove past on the old highway sometimes and always slowed down a little when I did. My sister-in-law called at 1:14. I let it ring. She called again at 1:22. On the third call at 1:31 I answered because I wanted to understand what version of the situation she was working from. She told me she understood this was a difficult time for both of us. She said the estate attorney had reviewed the property and determined it was subject to probate as part of my brother's assets. She said she was not trying to be unkind, but that she had her own financial needs to consider, and the farm was the most significant asset in the estate. She used the word estate 4 times. She used the phrase moving forward twice. People repeat the words they have been told to use. I waited until she was finished. Then I said, in the same measured tone I had used for 30 years when explaining a joint to an apprentice who had rushed a cut, "The property is not part of his estate. It transferred to me at the moment of his death. That is what joint tenancy means. It is on the deed, and the deed is on file at the county clerk's office." A silence, not long but the kind that has weight behind it. She said her attorney had told her differently. I said I would be happy to have my attorney contact hers directly to clarify the document. She said I was making this harder than it needed to be. I said I wasn't making anything harder. I was describing a deed. The call ended in a way that wasn't quite a hang-up, but wasn't a goodbye either. I set the phone on the counter and stood there for a moment. Outside, the oak tree at the corner of the workshop moved in a low afternoon wind. My brother had planted that tree the year we bought the property. He had dug the hole himself with a borrowed post digger and complained about the clay soil for 2 days afterward. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the workshop. The blanket chest I was building for my daughter needed its corner joints fitted. Cherry wood, hand-cut dovetails, the kind of work that takes everything you have and gives it back to you in the form of something that fits right. I planed 2 sides until the tolerances were where I wanted them and let the rhythm of the work settle the parts of my mind that were still finding their footing. The shop smelled of cedar and linseed oil the way it always had. That hadn't changed, and I was not going to pretend it had. My attorney called at 4:48. The letter was ready. He read it to me. A clear statement of the ownership structure. A citation of the relevant Tennessee statute on joint tenancy and survivorship rights. A notice that any attempt to list, encumber, or restrict access to the property without my written consent would be addressed through appropriate legal channels. No threats, no elevated language. Just facts presented with enough precision to be unmistakable. I told him to send it. He sent it at 5:02 by certified email to her attorney's office with a hard copy by certified mail. Her attorney called my attorney the following morning at 9:15. My attorney called me at 9:40 to relay what had been said. The other attorney's position had shifted overnight. He acknowledged the joint tenancy structure. He said his client was exploring whether any other elements of the estate might create a claim on the property, a prior lien, an overlapping interest, something in the original purchase history. My attorney told him that was their prerogative to explore, and that we would respond to anything they produced in writing. He told me to stay put and not allow anyone onto the property without my knowledge. That evening, my daughter called from Knoxville. She had spoken to her aunt earlier in the day and was doing the careful, measured thing she did when she was worried and trying not to amplify it. She asked me to tell her what was actually happening. I told her. The outline of it, the voicemail, the deed, the attorney, the letter. She was quiet while I talked, the way she had always been a good listener, even as a child. When I finished, she was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "She doesn't get to take that farm, Dad. You and Uncle built that place from nothing." I told her she was right, and that I intended to demonstrate it through the appropriate process. We talked for a while about other things. Her youngest had started walking. She and her husband were thinking about putting a garden in the backyard of their house. Before she hung up, she said, "I don't know how you're not furious right now." I told her I'd think about that and let her know. I slept adequately. Not well, but adequately. That was sufficient. On the third morning, my attorney called before 8. He said, "I need to ask you something. Did your brother do any estate planning separately? Anything beyond the main will in the last year or 2? I told him my brother had updated his will about 2 years back when he was first diagnosed. I had not been involved in the process and did not have a copy. My attorney said, "I've been doing this long enough to know that careful people sometimes make quiet arrangements. Your brother, was he a careful man?" My brother had been the most deliberate man I ever knew. He checked load weights before every haul. He kept his farm records in a 3-ring binder organized by year and season, each section tabbed with masking tape in his own handwriting. He had never in his life signed a document without reading it twice and asking at least one question. I said he was the most careful man I knew. My attorney said, "Then find out if he met with anyone separately. An estate attorney, a trust specialist, anyone beyond the person who drafted the main will." I called the attorney who had handled my brother's original will, a woman in Cookville who had practiced estate law in our county for decades. I explained who I was. She expressed her condolences in the plain and genuine way of someone who actually means it. Then she said, "He did come back in to see me." about 8 months ago. He said he had something specific he wanted documented, separate from the main will, a provision regarding the farm property. She passed a document across the desk. I read it the way I always read important things, slowly, fully, without skimming. My brother had written a letter, notarized and filed with her office, addressed to whomever might be administering his estate. In it, he described the joint tenancy structure that he and I had established in 1991. He confirmed his understanding that the property would transfer to me automatically upon his death and required no probate action. And then he had written something I had not expected and would not have predicted. He wrote that he was aware his wife might attempt to claim the property through estate proceedings or through other means of pressure on me, and that he wanted his intentions stated clearly in an official and notarized document. The farm was mine, had been jointly ours, and he had no wish for his death to be used as a mechanism to separate me from land we had built together. He further stated that should any estate assets be used to fund legal action against my property ownership, he asked the executor to treat that action as contrary to the spirit and conditions of his estate and to raise it formally with the probate court. The estate attorney looked at me over the desk when I set the document down. She said, "He told me he wasn't sure you'd ever need it, but he said he wanted it there in case you did." I sat with that for a moment. The light coming through her office window was the particular light of late April, low and clear, after the trees have leafed out, but before the summer makes everything heavy. My brother had known. He had understood the shape of things well enough to have prepared for this, quietly, without telling me, 8 months before he died. He had driven into Cookville, sat in this chair, and asked this woman to write down exactly what he was afraid of and file it where it could be found. He had done it with the same unhurried thoroughness he brought to every important thing in his life. He had always been the one who measured twice. I thanked the attorney and asked for a certified copy. She had one ready, which told me she had been expecting someone would come asking for it eventually. I drove back to the farm and called my attorney from the truck in the driveway. I read him the relevant sections. When I finished, there was a pause on his end, the pause of someone who is quietly satisfied but too professional to say so. He said, "That settles quite a bit. I'll send it tonight." He sent it to her attorney at 6:18 that evening. I watched the timestamp on his text message confirmation while sitting at the kitchen table. Outside, the workshop roof caught the last of the day's light, going amber across the old cedar shingles. I had laid that roof in the summer of 1994 with a neighbor's help, 2 days of work in July heat, and we had finished by drinking cold beer on the tailgate of my truck. My brother had been there, leaning against the fence post, watching us work, occasionally offering opinions about the ridge angle that I had largely declined to incorporate because he was the one with the hurt shoulder, not me. We had argued about it mildly for about 20 minutes and then moved on. I thought about that for a while. Her attorney called my attorney the next morning. My attorney called me at 9:15. He said, "They're standing down." His voice was even, professional, giving nothing away that didn't need to be given. Her attorney had confirmed that his client had not been fully informed of the joint tenancy arrangement when she had retained him. Given the notarized letter now on file with my brother's estate, there was no legal basis for any claim on the farm property. His client was prepared to limit all estate proceedings to assets that actually fell within the estate: the cattle, the bank accounts, in my brother's name alone, the equipment that had been solely his. I asked if they would put that in writing. My attorney said they already had. My sister-in-law called that afternoon. I answered on the second ring. Her voice was different from the earlier calls, quieter, like something that had been rigid had loosened. She said her attorney had explained things more fully. She said she understood now that the property situation was different from what she had been told. I said I appreciated her calling. A pause. Then she said, "He never told me he had done that, the letter." I said, "He didn't tell me either." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said he always did things the long way around. I told her that was true. I told her it was one of the things I had always valued in him. We did not say much after that. She said she hoped things could remain civil as the estate was settled. I said they could, and I meant it. Whatever had happened in those first weeks, she was still the woman who had shared 31 years of her life with my brother, had cooked in that farmhouse kitchen, had sat with him through 2 years of difficult decline. That was real. I was not going to pretend it wasn't. We ended the call without cruelty. That was enough. The legitimate estate proceedings moved at the pace such things move when no one is trying to burn anything down. A probate attorney handled the inventory of my brother's actual assets, the cattle, sold at fair market value, his personal equipment, the accounts in his name. My attorney confirmed that the farm required no probate action at all. The deed transfer to my name alone was recorded at the county clerk's office in May, a matter of paperwork and a filing fee, and the same clerk's office where my brother and I had stood together in 1991, though the furniture had been replaced and the notary was a different person. I signed the updated deed and watched the clerk stamp it. I did not say anything. The document said what needed to be said. A neighbor from down the road came by in June with a foil-covered dish and the careful expression of someone who has heard two versions of a story and isn't sure which is accurate. We sat on the back porch and I told her the plain outline of what had happened. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, she really thought she could do that. I said, she thought she could. Her attorney let her think so longer than he should have. My neighbor shook her head slowly. Then she said, your brother always looked out for you, even when you didn't know it. I told her that was right. I told her I'd been sitting with that thought for a while. She left the dish and drove home. It was a good casserole. That seemed beside the point and also somehow not entirely. My daughter flew in for a long weekend in July. We replaced the cedar boards on the workshop's south wall where some had warped over the winter, and she handed me tools the way she had when she was 12, and thought helping with projects was the finest possible way to spend a Saturday. In the evenings, we sat on the back porch with the kind of quiet that belongs to a farm at dusk. The cattle gone now from the east pasture, the field grasses growing tall along the fence line, the fireflies starting up near the tree line as the light went out of the sky. On the last evening, she set down her tea and said, you never lost your head through any of it, not once. How? I looked out at the workshop, the light still on inside, falling in a rectangle through the open door across the grass. I said, losing my head would have made me feel like something was happening. Moving carefully made something actually happen. She turned that over for a moment. Then she said, Uncle would have said exactly that. I told her I thought he already had in his own way, 8 months before he needed to. She leaned her head against my shoulder the way she had when she was small, and we were waiting on something, a storm, a parade, anything that required patience. The field was dark now, except for the fireflies working the margins. I watched them without trying to count them. I had not spoken with my sister-in-law about anything beyond necessary estate paperwork since our last call. We communicated when we needed to, briefly and without weather. She had found her footing, I gathered, and I did not wish her poorly. Whatever she had been reaching for in those first weeks, she had reached for it out of fear, and I understood that, even if I could not have allowed it. What I felt, when I let myself feel anything about the whole matter, was something close to what I imagined my brother had felt when he sat in that estate attorney's office 8 months before his death. A kind of sober clarity about the people in your life, about what they are capable of under pressure, and about what it is worth doing quietly while you still can. He had not told me about the letter because he had not wanted to put that weight on our last 2 years together. He had filed it away like a spare key left, somewhere a person could find it in a difficult hour, without needing to be told where to look. He had trusted that I would know to ask the right questions when the time came. That was him. That had always been him. The man who double-checked everything, who kept his records in a labeled binder, who drove into town on a fall afternoon when he was tired and sick and sat across from a woman he trusted and made sure that whatever happened after he was gone, the thing we had built together would stay where it belonged. I was in my 63rd year. I did not know how many more mornings I had on that land, but I intended to find out by using them. That morning I had started breaking ground for a new raised bed along the south fence, something I had been meaning to do for a decade. Good black soil under the first layer of sod, the kind that rewards patient work. The phone sat on the workbench inside. I had developed the habit of leaving it there during work hours, which turned out to be a habit I had no intention of correcting. Some things you do not understand fully until someone tries to take them. The farm had always been mine in the ways that mattered. The work, the mornings, the 33 years of accumulated repair and care. What changed was only that the paperwork had been brought into alignment with the fact. My brother had made sure of that. He had done it the way he did everything, quietly, thoroughly, without making a fuss about it. He had written it down and left it where someone would find it. If this story stayed with you, I want to hear which part. Leave a comment below, where you're listening from, what you would have done differently, or what you recognized in it. I read everyone. Stories like this live in kitchens and county clerks' offices, and the quiet interiors of workshops where careful people make careful decisions. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one. Walk carefully out there.